All right, guys, we're gonna keep it real tonight. It is this is a Bible study that was prompted by a discussion we had earlier, just about the last days. And guys, I'm just seeing what's going on in our world and in this financial system. And there's a big piece of the last days that is going to be financial that Jesus talks about. I mean Jesus talks about to John in Revelation in particular. We'll get to a little later if we hopefully we'll have some time, but I'm just seeing the fact that, just things that Jesus spoke of, that Paul spoke of, and then, John spoke of in Revelation as well. You just kind of put things together, and we are in very serious times. And what's going on at the World Economic Forum is very biblical. I mean, the Bible is just like all the stuff that they're trying to do. The Bible kind of forecasts it, and you can just see things heading in this direction. And what's happening is, in the last 20 years of my life, things have moved exponentially so much faster towards these biblical prophecies that I never would have imagined we would be where we are in my lifetime. I just, things have moved so fast. So the more global the world gets, the more that the internet has served to make the world global. It's just everything is rushing towards this day of finality, guys, that is coming, that you need to, number one, be warned about and encouraged to seek refuge in the one who's going to win on that day. The good news is that we know the winner. See, Jesus says, don't worry. I'm about to tell you some stuff, but don't worry. I'm telling you this in advance, he says, because I don't want anybody to lead you astray, and I don't want you to be alarmed either. All this stuff I'm going to tell you has to take place, he says, but the end won't be yet. But don't worry, I win in the end, okay? So there's some scary stuff that Jesus talks about and that Revelation speaks about, and that we who are here during the last days, if it's in our generation, we're going to live through some stuff, and you need to know about it. And so, because there is, and I'll share with you a little later, here's the big deal. There's a great delusion. You guys know what delusion is, right? It's when someone believes something false. They're deluded. They believe something, they've been tricked and deceived. There's a great deception coming. It's going to be so powerful that the entire world is going to believe it, except those of us who have been warned in advance about it. We will be protected from that. But Jesus says, when he describes it, it's going to be so powerful that if it were possible, even God's people would believe the lie and the deception that's going to be coming. So I'm going to talk about that as we get there. So what I kind of wanted to do, I want to keep it, open-ended, but I also wanted to kind of deliver some material a little bit on the front end to kind of get a framework for what the last days are going to look like, and to show you where crypto kind of fits into that scheme and what might be on the cusp of what's coming. So that's kind of the goal of what we're going to do tonight. We'll go as long as we feel like it, come in and out, just grab your coffee and ask your questions. I get to talking sometimes, and I keep talking and I keep teaching, and sometimes I need to be shut up with a question or a comment. So feel free to interact as we go along. But maybe for the first 15 minutes or so, I can kind of give a framework or a general idea. And I'm going to put all the scriptures on my screen so that you'll have them. Anybody watching or listening to the recording, or you guys, they're going to be in front of you. I use a Bible software program called eSword. You can download that for free from e-sword.net. This guy made a nice Bible app that's completely free. He takes donations if you want to get it and send him a donation. So, all right. Does that sound good?
Sounds good.
All right, cool. So that's just kind of what spurred this on. So when there's a lot of, let me start by dispelling something that people often say about prophecy. Well, that's your interpretation. You say, there's so many different interpretations. And that's true. There are. But there are ways of interpreting that lead you to a confident understanding of the text if you'll follow those rules. In seminary, we take entire classes, semester courses on that biblical interpretation science. It's called hermeneutics, where we learn rules of logic, rules of interpretation that keep you, if you follow them, they'll keep you on the narrow path to gaining a proper understanding of the text. So I operate as best I can on a good set of literal and biblical hermeneutics, or it's the science of biblical interpretation. That's what hermeneutics is. With that said, one of the key things, two key principles that I operate on that keeps me safe in it, and I'll just share them with you now. Number one, the author of the text determines the meaning, not the reader. That's really critical. So as I come to the Bible, somebody has written something many, many years ago down, and whoever that was, whether it was Matthew or whether it was John or whatever the speaker is, whoever's speaking, the author of the words is the one who determines the meaning. So it's not my job to read the Bible and decide what I think it means. That's bad interpretation. Rather, my job is to listen to what the author said in a context of all the other words that he said and come away as best I can trying to understand what they were trying to convey to me, not coming to the text with a preconceived notion and working really hard to fit the words into my preconceived notions. Does that make sense? So the bad way of interpretation is what we call eisegesis, where Jesus is birth or Genesis, like where you're inserting a meaning into the text, into, right? What we want to do is get the meaning out of the text. So exegesis is what we try to do. We try to exegete the text. We're starting with the notion that our job is to get the meaning from the text, not to put the meaning into the text. And that's really, really important, because if we have the same rule of interpretation on the front end that says, hey, it's not fair for you to decide what that means, it's our job together as a community of good readers to read what has been delivered to us and ask the author from the text, what does that mean? What were you saying? And to come away with the meaning as we read the words in its context. So that's one thing. And then the second rule is some things you read are very, very hard to understand. And they're unclear what the meaning is, depending on who wrote it, when they wrote it, and what they said. Right? Some of the prophecies are very, very, how do I say it? They're very, they're odd in their writing, and they're meant to kind of
poetic.
What's that?
They're poetic.
They're poetic, yeah, and they're meant to kind of hide the meaning, and for some, and he who has an ear, let him hear. There's a sense in which some of these prophecies were given deliberately shadowy and so we read some of these, you're like, man, what does that mean? And we don't know. And then we read some other stuff and we're like, oh, that's really clear. It's really clear and plain what he's saying. So what we do is we put more emphasis on what we know and understand with certainty, or the greater certainty. I mean, we do our best. We always have to put what we believe on a shelf and say, well, this is what I believe and this is why I believe it. But we all have to come to the Bible with the notion that what I believe and how I believe that text could be wrong. I approach the Bible every time I come to it like that. Like, I could be wrong, but I have done my very best to be as right as I can be using good interpretation or whatever. So anyway, I want to lay that down on the front end, that we're going to start with the clear, and then we'll go to the unclear and see if the clear helps us understand the unclear, rather than putting emphasis, spending all of our time on the unclear, and then having these conversations that, oh man, we can wax eloquently about the unclear. You know what I mean? We can just, I think that could mean this or that. Who cares what we think it means? is there evidence from the text? This is like technical analysis. What is the chart saying, man? It's not like, oh, I think I'm a bull, here's my proof, and I'll try to find the proof in the chart. We try to come to the chart as neutral as possible and say, okay, what is the chart saying to us? That's kind of the way I approach the Bible. We come to the Bible neutral and says there's a message here that was delivered to us. What is that message? I want to be on the right end of the proper interpretation of that, because there's all kinds of bad interpretations out there. And I guess one final note is, just because there's a bunch of bad interpretations out there doesn't mean that you can't come to a good interpretation of it. Does that make sense? It doesn't mean that there's not a good interpretation, or that one of the interpretations you've heard isn't right. I mean, in other words, there might be a bunch of different people thinking, 10 different people say something means 10 different things. One of them may be right. And just because it's hard to understand doesn't mean that you can't know what it means. So anyway, the topic that we're covering lends itself to some fun discussion, and there's just some stuff that we just don't know. And at the end of the day, we're just going to have to admit we don't know. But there is some cool stuff that we do know. And what we do know, I want to deliver to you so you can be at least ready for what we do know. So anyway, that's kind of a breakdown. Anybody have any comments or questions about, just along those lines? Does that make sense to y'all? Or
something that I heard that some seminaries do is to back up the argument of their understanding with multiple different texts in the Bible. Like if you have a passage that you're trying to decipher, if you can find 2 or 3 other passages that kind of say the same thing, it adds credence to the passage you're trying to decipher.
Now, that's a great point. Can I add to it just a little bit?
Joel nuts.
So that's a really good point. But Joel Osteen does that kind of stuff with some bad interpretation. He'll pick a bunch of verses out of the Bible to make his point. But what he does is he handles each verse out of context. And if you hear those verses out of context, all of a sudden, it sounds like, oh man, he's saying what the Bible says. Certainly he's quoting the Bible. But if you go to those words within context of each verse, you'll be like, well, that verse doesn't mean the way he's meaning it, if you read it in its context. So I would add to what you just said, as you interpret each text that you bring as evidence, every verse individually should have been understood within its original context to come away with a good interpretation of that text. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I agree.
Because there are a lot of guys out there, they'll pick a bunch of verses out of context and they'll list them off, and it sounds like, oh man, they got a rock solid argument. Well, somebody say something?
I don't know. I think Seth is just trying to cut in, but he's cutting out.
Was that Audra?
That'd be odd if you guys could hear us, because I wasn't pushing the button.
Yeah. So Audra was trying to say something. Push the button.
She was just getting me coffee.
Oh, okay.
That's funny.
Well, maybe no. It's chemo. It's somebody. It's a female in your mic.
That might be Jen. Jen's sitting here with me.
Oh, hey Jen, what's up?
Hey, how are you?
Good. Glad you're joining us.
Oh yeah.
All right. Anybody else on that topic? I just like to, because we don't know. None of us know each other as far as what we believe or what our prior experience with the Bible is. But what I try to do is try to level the playing field here. We're all on even ground here. If we all have a Bible in front of us or the text in front of us, then we can actually just read the words and come away with the meaning, rather than having to have prior knowledge. So.
I agree. And I think that's the beautiful thing, is that the truth is going to be the truth, whether or not we understand it.
Yes.
And one of the fun things about Revelations is that it comes with a blessing in verse 3, where it's like, blessed are those who
read and understand. Yep.
Yeah. And it's one of those things where I don't know that that's in any of the other Bible or any of the other books. in the Bible where you actually have a promise of like, this is going to benefit you. You're going to be blessed because you read this. I'm like, well, that makes that kind of important.
No doubt, yo, no doubt. All right, so let me give you a framework here. For me, and my understanding, I have come to the conclusion that Matthew 24 and Matthew 25 are the cornerstone of what you need to know about the last days. And when I say the last days, I mean the last days, right? Right, Seth? We know...
Final end days.
Right, the final portion. We've been in the last days since Jesus rose from the dead and ascended into heaven. We've been in the last days. You know, the New Testament writers were looking, you know, they knew it was the last days as well. But when we're talking about the very near, Matthew 24 and 25 is Jesus's answer to the explicit question of the disciples. The disciples, Jesus, can you see the Bible in front of you on Matthew 24:1? It says Jesus left the temple and was going away when his disciples came to point out to him the buildings of the temple. And he answered them. He says, "You see all these? Do you not?" He says, "I say to you, there will not be left here one stone upon another that will not be thrown down." Now, they were pointing out the temple and say, "Look how pretty. Look at this temple, Jesus." And Jesus is like, you know what's going to happen to that temple? There's not going to be one stone standing on top of another one day. There's coming a day. And so look at the question of verse 3. And he sat on the Mount of Olives, and the disciples came to him privately saying, Hey, Jesus, tell us, when will these things be? And what will be the sign of your coming and the end of the age? There's the explicit question. So if you had Jesus here with you physically, like right now, and you could ask him, hey, when's all this stuff going down, Jesus? That's exactly what they were doing. They had Jesus in front of them and said, when is this stuff going to go down? When will the temple be destroyed? And then they go further than that. What will be the sign of your coming? Now, so they understood that Jesus has not risen to power yet, that he had not come to take his throne, so to speak. And they were like, when's that going to happen? And then they say, and specifically, and the end of the age. So they want to know, when's the end? When are you going to set up shop as king? When's the temple going to be torn down? And when's the end of the age? They want to know. So Matthew 24 and Matthew 25 are Jesus' answer to that question. And it's just as plain as day. It's clear and plain. And when you read it, you should come away with as if you asked that question of Jesus. What would Jesus want you to know? What's important is he doesn't give them a date or a time. In fact, he says in this text, nobody knows it. Nobody knows the day or the hour. Nobody's going to know that. And it's not for you to know. But he does say, but you can know the seasons. And he gives a couple of examples. He's like, hey, when you see the blossoms on the fig leaves, you know summer's coming. So when you see these things begin to happen, you know it's coming. So there's a sense in which we're not going to know when the end is, but there's going to be stuff that we'll begin seeing that Jesus will describe here, that when we start to see it, we're going to be like, oh, the end's coming. It's like seeing a fig tree blossom, its leaves, and you're like, oh, summer's coming. And so what I'm seeing, what started this Bible study for me and why I wanted to share it and record it, is that I'm seeing blossoms, guys. I have always been one prior to the last several years, been one saying, the coming of Jesus is a ways away. I mean, I believe he's coming, but I'm not seeing enough evidence to get me thinking, it's close and imminent. But I'm here to tell you guys, the more I'm in this crypto space and seeing what's going on at the World Economic Forum and all that's happening globally right now, I'm like, the coming of Jesus is, summer's here. Summer's coming. You know what I mean? So, but that's the important thing. So what I do then is I start with Matthew 24. What does Jesus say about it? And I read what he says, and I take what Jesus says with the utmost authority and the utmost clarity, and I start there. And then all the other texts out there, I interpret in light of Matthew 24 and in light of Matthew 25. And if you do that, you will be safe in your interpretation. So that's kind of point number one I wanted to share, and that's the way I come at this. So all that's left is, shall we just read Matthew 24 and 25 real quick?
Let's get some.
So basically, the question is, when? When's the sign of your coming and the coming at the end of the age? Verse 3. And Jesus answered, see that no one leads you astray. So the very first thing Jesus is concerned with is what? I don't want you to be fooled. I don't want anybody to lead you down the wrong path of thinking. I don't want anybody to lead you astray. Many will come in my name saying, I'm the Christ, and they will lead many astray. And you will hear of wars and rumors of wars. See that you're not alarmed, for this must take place, but the end is not yet. Nation will rise up against nation, and kingdom against kingdom, and there will be famines and earthquakes in various places. All these things are just the beginning of the birth pains. They will deliver you up to tribulation, and they will put you to death, and you will be hated by all nations for my name's sake. Many will fall away and betray one another and hate one another, and there'll be false prophets will rise and lead many astray. Verse 12, and because lawlessness will be increased, the love of many will grow cold. But the one who endures to the end, he'll be saved. In other words, don't worry. All this stuff's got to happen. I don't want anybody to lead you astray. This is some bad crap's coming. I don't think that's what Jesus said, but that's the what version is that? And Jesus said, "Watch out, some bad crap's coming."
There are times
that's red letter text. Red letter text right there. Bad crap.
Sorry,
Now you can see it in the Gospels and Jesus turned to them and was like, "What the crap?" Like I can't quote exactly what he said, but that is what he just said to them. It was clearly communicated. You've been here for how long?
Yeah, right. The one who endures to the end will be saved. And this gospel of the kingdom will be proclaimed throughout the whole world as a testimony to all nations, and then the end will come. Okay, so there it is. There's kind of a synopsis there he gives, right? It's just a general, all right, here's number one, there's going to be false Christs. And I'm telling you this so that no one leads you astray. Don't let anybody, I don't care if anybody else comes and says, I'm the Christ. They're not. Anybody that says I'm the Christ, they're not. I'll just put it to you. So if you got anybody on this earth and you say, hey, is this the Christ? You're not sure about it? I'm going to show you in just a minute a text when we get to it. No, when Jesus shows up, you're going to know it, and everybody's going to know it. There ain't nobody going to have to tell you this is Jesus. You're going to know it when he shows up. So don't let anybody lead you astray, no matter what they say. I don't care what they say. So that should keep you from false teachers right there. Anybody tries to pretend that they've been sent by God and they're Jesus incarnate now again in the last days, yeah, don't listen to them. And then he says you're going to hear of war and then rumors of more wars. So the character of the last days, the end of the age, is there's going to be a bunch of war. Fair enough? Verse 6. Wars and rumors of wars. A bunch of war. He says, don't be alarmed. It's got to take place. But so this is an alarming kind of war. This is war that should scare you. But he says, don't be alarmed because this has to happen. But the end isn't yet. So this is just before the end. There's a bunch of war going on. So when you start to see the world become this global, World War I and World War II, I imagine was pretty scary for believers at that time. They're seeing war all over, you know what I mean? Wars and rumors of wars, right? I don't think, obviously, those weren't the wars Jesus was referring to. They may be part of that, wars and rumors of wars. But evidently, this is going to be some kind of an intense global war. Because he goes on to say, nation will rise against nation, kingdom against kingdom. Verse 7. There's famine going to be going on. The earth is going to be quaking. So there's going to be signs in the earth. And he says, and these are just the beginning of the birth pains. Just the beginnings. He uses birth pains. Why do you think he uses that?
Is it Antichrist type stuff?
No, I mean, what's the analogy of birth pains? What's a birth pain? Ladies will know that, who have had children. They're just
looking at you, Ben.
What are you for?
They're just the pains at the are the birth pains. Is that the birth? No, that's just the trouble before the birth, right?
Yeah.
That's letting you know. Hey, that's letting you know there's a baby coming. But this is the painful period before the baby shows up, right? That's Jesus' language here. Hey, listen, I'm coming back. But these are the things that are going to happen before I come back, and it's going to hurt. These are birth pains. But they're letting you know when you start feeling these pains, and the more that they intensify, I think the closer we'll be. That's a good analogy he uses there.
Kind of want it to be over.
Yeah, you're going to want it to be over. You're like, come on, Jesus. Come on, Jesus. This hurts. We'll be looking up and praying all the more. We'll say, I mean, even so, come, Lord Jesus. I mean, we see all this stuff happening. We'll be looking for deliverance. It'll be that bad. Verse 9 says they'll deliver you up to tribulation and put you to death. Who's you? He's pointing to the disciples. Now, every one of those guys were killed for the sake of Jesus. Every one of them. Does that mean that Jesus was just talking about the 12? I think he was referring to all of God's people. He says, you will be hated by who? All nations for my name's sake. What does that tell you about the last days? Christians are going to be hated by who? All nations.
Christians or by everybody?
In every nation, Christians will be persecuted. They will be, and so in America, this is coming. This is coming. It's not here yet. I mean, there are a lot of people that hate Christians, and we're the only religion that isn't allowed to speak our mind. If you're Buddhist, if you're Muslim, if you're anything else, oh, you're good to go. Jesus, not so much.
Yeah, that's true. That's been happening a lot.
But
it's past 10 years, something like that.
But it's going to intensify. It's going to intensify to such a degree that we're going to be imprisoned. We're going to be put to death for it. There are already Christians we know being put to death now in other countries. But this text says all nations. So you bear the name of Jesus, you will not be liked. So it's going to behoove some people are going to be like, well, I can't tell people I'm a Christian. That's the scary place to be. If you're ashamed of Jesus, even because of death, he says, if you won't confess me, I won't confess you. In other words, a true believer who is following Jesus will find, he might find it hard, but he will not bow the knee and to save his own life. He will owe his life to his Savior, Jesus, and he will. That's a scary thing. Verse 10 says, and many will fall away. That's apostasy. They'll leave Jesus. And they'll betray their Christian brothers and sisters, hate one another. There'll be false prophets rising up in verse 11. And because lawlessness will be increased, in other words, the world will be so sinful that lawless is the way it's described. Just like people do whatever they want to do. The love of many who once loved Jesus will grow cold. So in the last days, there's going to be an apostasy happening, where people who were once maybe believers in Christ, they will eventually just throw Jesus under the bus and forget this Jesus stuff. It's too hard. There's too much sin. There's too much tribulation. There's too much persecution. I'm done with the Jesus stuff. And they will their love for him will grow cold. But Jesus says, but the one who endures. So what is, in the context, what's he referring to? The one who endures to the end will be saved. What's he saying? The one who doesn't grow cold, the one who doesn't get led astray by false prophets, the one who doesn't succumb to the fear of death because of him. The one who makes it to the end. Here's your encouragement. You will be saved. Jesus says it in another place. He tells his disciples, they're going to chop off your head, but don't worry. You won't lose one hair on your head. They're going to put you to death, but you won't lose a hair on your head. What does that mean? Death ain't the end.
Still have your soul.
What's that?
You still have your soul.
Yeah, and that's what's eternal. And that's what God's concerned with. The eternal, not this physical body that's going to die one day. Now, there's a resurrection coming where he's going to give these souls new bodies and they'll live forever. We won't have to deal with this stuff anymore. But this stuff is going to happen in this dead world. So this is Jesus' description of the last days. So are we there yet? Is all this stuff going on? Not really. Are we heading this way? Man, I can see it on the horizon. Can't you guys?
Yeah, definitely. Like the complacency in God. Like people don't really talk about it. Like you think 100 years ago, society was more God focused and whatnot, and people basically learned to read off the Bible. And nowadays, you're learning all kinds of other weird stuff. You learn to read from whatever they're pushing in school nowadays, which is, from what I'm hearing in my area, is just very wokeism. What the heck?
Yeah, what Jesus describes here, though, I mean, you can see it coming. It's not here yet, but you can see. It's like we're in the infancy stages of this, really. With how fast things have progressed in the last 20 years of my life, what are the next 20 years going to bring on? Oh, man. You know what I'm saying?
It's almost like parabolic, like it's exponentially
right, exactly.
quickening.
Exactly. And that's why I'm a little bit of alarmed. Like, well, I ain't seeing all these things yet, but I can see us getting there relatively quickly.
Yeah. There's
more to say. Am I going too slow? I can go faster. Or is it good speed for you?
Doing good?
I think you're good.
Okay, well, tell me, because I get preachy sometimes, because I just read that twice, but I read it once and then preached it to you. So, all right, let's go to 15, the second half of what Jesus says. This is still the answer. So, when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by the prophet Daniel, all right, there you go, Seth. So Jesus is referencing Daniel. Daniel talked about an abomination of desolation. He says that's a sign. So you can go back and read Daniel about the abomination of desolation. But what does Jesus say about it? Because he explains what it is. The abomination of desolation, it will be standing in the holy place. Let the reader understand. Then those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. Get out. When you see the abomination of desolation standing in the holy place, get out of town. Let the one who's on the housetop not go down to his house. And let the one who's in the field not turn back to go get your coat. Alas, for women who are pregnant and for those who are nursing infants in those days, pray that your flight may not be winter or on the Sabbath. Because then there will be great tribulation like there has never been on the earth. From the beginning of the world until now, no and never will be. So there's another piece of the puzzle. That there's going to be an abomination of desolation. There's going to be an event that you'll recognize. You'll see someone standing in the holy place committing an abomination that Daniel spoke about. He says, when you see that, that's the big sign. It is really getting ready to go down. He says, just stop working in the field. You just drop your stuff and go. If you're don't go back in your house to collect your belongings. You ain't gonna have time. I'm sorry for you who are pregnant in those days. It's going to be a hard deal. That's what Jesus is saying. And what's he saying in verse 21? It's going to be a great tribulation. There will be great tribulation. And what's the nature of that tribulation? 21 says, such as has not been from the beginning of the world until now, no, and never will be. By the way, I'm going to just go back to the beginning part of what I said. Do you notice my style here? I'm reading the text, and then as I preach it, you notice I just reread it. In other words, the meaning is coming directly from the text. I'm not inserting anything in. I'm not saying words that aren't there, right? I'm simply repeating those words for emphasis and maybe using them in natural language that just, So that's the key to Bible reading. Read it and then reread it. And it's clear what he's saying. You don't have, the meaning is right there in the text, plain as day. So there's going to be a great tribulation. What kind of tribulation? Like it's never been from the beginning of the world till now. So we've had wars and rumors of wars. We've had earthquakes, haven't we? We've had persecution. Christians have been killed. So what is Jesus talking about then? All that stuff is going to be like it's never been. So that's the kind of stuff we're looking for. Tribulation like it's never been. It'll be so, in my opinion, based on so this is where I'm thinking outside. I think it's going to be so different and so much worse that you're going to be like, it ain't never been this bad. And you're going to see the signs. Then Jesus says something pretty alarming in verse 22. If those days are not cut short, no human being would be saved. There's going to be so much tribulation on the earth, nobody would live. Everybody would die. It's going to be so bad. So those earthquakes, they're not just going to be quakes. Oh, there's an earthquake. It's going to be so bad, people are going to be dying all over the place. The famines, there's been famine before, hasn't there? But the famine is going to be so pervasive, people are going to be dying all over the place. There's been war, but the war is going to be so pervasive that people are going to be dying all over the place. And if Jesus didn't cut those days short, and I think that simply means, all right, that's enough, and then he comes. In other words, if he let those events continue to go on and on and on beyond a certain specific period of time, nobody would be saved. Nobody would live. But he says, but for the sake of the elect, those days will be cut short. In other words, he's not going to allow it to go on and on. It's going to happen, but it's not going to go on and on. God's going to cut those days short for the sake of the elect. Now, the elect here, just that's a phrase for God's people. God's chosen ones. God's people. So verse 23 says, so if anyone says to you, look, here's the Christ, or there he is. Jesus says, don't believe it. This is what I was referring to, by the way. When Jesus says, see that no one leads you astray and says, I'm the Christ. He says, if anybody says that to you, do not believe it. Because there are going to be false Christs, verse 24 says, false prophets will arise and perform great signs and wonders so as to lead many astray. And if possible, even God's people. In other words, these guys that show up in the last days who are saying, I'm the Christ or whatever, their lies and their delusion is going to be pretty powerful that if it were possible, even God's people would believe them. But he says,
so how literal should you take that, the Christ, the actual word Christ in there? Would it be prudent to say just people that are of influence in our day and age?
No,
you could extend it to like Elon Musk or something like that.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. No, he's referring to the Christ, the Messiah. We believers, we're looking for Christ to come back. We're looking for Jesus to return, right? And so if somebody says, Jesus showed up last night. He's out there, he's over there in this place and that place. Do not believe them. And he says in verse 25, see, I told you beforehand. So you don't have to be led astray by anybody that says the Christ has come back, the Christ has returned, or who claims to be a Christ or a prophet. The Christ or a prophet. He says, I told you before, so you're not going to be deceived. So if they say to you, verse 26, look, he's in the wilderness, don't go out there. If they say, look, he's in the inner rooms, don't believe it. And here's what he says, verse 27. For as the lightning comes from the east and shines as far as the west, so will the coming of the Son of Man be. In other words, when Jesus returns, nobody's going to have to tell you, hey, Jesus came back. You're going to know it. It's going to be so evident. It's going to be like lightning. Nobody, when lightning happens, everybody knows. It's unmistakable. Nobody needs to be told that, oh, there's lightning, except a blind person. But even then, they might be able to see some form of light. But his point is, nobody's going to have to tell you. Put 2 and 2 together, verse 28. Where the corpse is, the vultures will gather. What's that mean? When you see vultures out in the distance, all gathering, what is that telling you is there?
Death.
There's something dead there, isn't there? So just put 2 and 2 together, man. You're gonna know. Like when you the same way you know there's a dead body there when vultures gather, and the same way you know when lightning comes, you're gonna know when Jesus comes back. So
you just associate Jesus with vultures.
it's an illustration to prove a point. He's just basically saying, don't believe it when they tell you, look, the Christ is here, the Christ is there. You're not going to have to be told. All right, here's where it gets fun. So let's review real fast. What are the birth pains? So that's the first thing he talks about, the birth pains. Like, and he gives that illustration. It's like the cramps. But how do those of you, when I watched my wife go through labor, those birth pains became more and more intense. Until there was a point when there was great tribulation in the birth. It got really bad, right? And nobody had to tell me when my daughter was born. When she was born, I saw her. She was there. There's the head. You know what I mean? So that's a great illustration. So right now I think we're in the beginning stages of those, maybe the last 2,000 years. We've got an intensification as the world becomes more global. These wars and rumors of wars are going to become more global, and they're going to become more and more intense.
It has an additional implication with birth pains because they come with greater intensity, but also greater frequency.
Yes. So I think that the birth pains, the earthquakes, the famines, the wars and rumors of wars, the persecution, all of those things are going to happen, and they're going to happen more and more with greater intensity. But that's not the end. He says that then there's going to be this abomination of desolation standing in the holy place. So only people stand. It might be, or I guess monuments can stand as well. So there might be some man that puts some monument for worship up of himself, where God should be, where Jesus should be worshipped. And we'll talk more about that later. But so we haven't really discussed the abomination of desolation. Why? Because Jesus doesn't discuss it. He just says when you see it. It is coming. There's going to be great tribulation like there's never been. It's going to be worse than it's ever been. And don't let anybody deceive you, because when I come, you're going to know it. So that brings us to verse 29. That's kind of the summary. Did I handle the text fairly? Do you object to the way I've kind of walked through that?
I think it's good.
I guess what I mean is, don't you really, does that seem like a fair rendering of what Jesus has said? Have I put words into his mouth in any way, or
No,
No.
it's better than I could do, I would say. So,
I've read and studied this for years, brother, and I've been working to be as technically correct as I possibly can. So all this is old hat for me, but I love talking about it. All right, let's go to 29 then. Immediately after the tribulation of those days. So Jesus is going chronologically, isn't he? There's birth pains. There's an abomination of desolation. There's tribulation like it's never been. And after the tribulation of those days, you see the chronological order he's discussing? So after those days, the sun will be darkened and the moon will not give its light. Whoa. How in the world can that happen? Well, he doesn't say, but he says the sun will be darkened and the moon won't give its light. And the stars will fall from heaven. Now that's a non-scientific, non-technical statement. But I don't think it's intended to be scientifically. But to the guy looking at it, it's going to look like this, like the stars are falling from heaven. The powers of the heavens will be shaken. The universe as we know it, it ain't going to be right. Something's going to be way off. Is that fair? Of verse 29? So after the tribulation of those days, there's going to be stuff going on in the heavens, stuff going on in our universe and in our sky and in our earth. That's super scary. Stars falling from heaven. What's that?
Like aliens.
Stars falling from heaven? Maybe that's comet or asteroids hitting the earth. I
guess so.
You know what I mean? Just like when you see meteors coming into our atmosphere, it kind of looks like stars, falling to the earth, Imagine an asteroid that makes it all the way to the earth and you see it burning up, coming in, It might look like a star, to the eye. I don't know. But whatever it is, it's going to be, the powers of the heavens will be shaken. The universe as we know it, now our maybe our solar system, maybe our earth system will be shaken pretty bad. So everybody's going to know about that.
I would tend to lean towards a more literal understanding because the first couple of statements is the sun will be darkened and there's no interpretation needed. The moon will not give its light, no interpretation needed, and the stars will fall from heaven. To me, that sounds like that's literally what will happen because there's not an implication that this is poetic in nature.
No, I think it's literally going to happen. But when I think about how it's going to happen, the way I think about it is the way I've got in my mind, there's going to be an asteroid or several asteroids hitting the earth. And you know how they talk about after that happens, it sends a bunch of debris and dust into the atmosphere and it'll blot out the sun. It'll
Same thing could happen with nuclear weapons with the amount that is proliferated.
So you got proliferation of wars and rumors of wars, and people are dying like crazy. So you got nuclear war going on, you got famine going on, and now you got some kind of major asteroid or some kind of something hitting the earth, sending up dust and debris into the heavens, and the sun is dark now because it ain't giving light. The moon, you can't see the moon or the sun anymore. That's kind of the way I think about it. Now I might, but I think you're right, Seth. But when I envision it, that's kind of the way I see just, maybe a modern understanding of what happens when asteroids hit the earth and how it might play out. I don't know, but it doesn't matter. What I do know is that it's going to be crazy scary. What's happening? It's going to be like, oh crap. And look what he says.
Well, this is how it would be explained to children and stuff, because that's basically what Jesus is doing. He's teaching his children. So how would you explain really bad stuff happening to children?
Yeah, he's not going to give them a scientific lesson. Well, you see, the intensity of the asteroid meteorite hitting the Earth sends dust into the heavens, and then you know what I mean. Yeah, exactly. It's just a simple statement that it's going to be a universal. Powers of the heavens will be shaken. That's a good, simple rendering of it. Verse 30, here's, then will appear in heaven the sign of the Son of Man. Then. So, when does Jesus return? Before the tribulation or after the tribulation?
After.
It's clear and plain. Jesus says nowhere, hey, listen, bunch of bad stuff coming, but don't worry. I'm going to show up before all that stuff happens, get you out of here, and then all that stuff's going to go down. Don't worry about it. He doesn't say any of that. He's warning his disciples and everyone else who's going to read this stuff's going down. Don't let anybody fool you. Don't be led astray. Don't be alarmed. This has got to happen. Endure to the end. You'll be saved. Don't worry about it. That's what Jesus is doing here. But then, after the tribulation of those days, the sun will be darkened, the moon won't give its light, and the stars will fall from heaven, and the powers of the heavens will be shaken. And then will appear the sign in heaven, the sign of the Son of Man. Then I'm showing up after that. And what's going to happen? All the tribes of the earth will mourn, because they will see the Son of Man coming in the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. So ain't nobody going to have to tell you Jesus is showing up. Everybody on the earth is going to know he's showing up. Everybody will see him. And he will be coming, how? In power and great glory. This ain't some secret visit. He's coming visibly and powerfully. Verse 31. And then he will send out his angels with a loud trumpet call, and they will gather his elect from the four winds, from one end of heaven to the other. There's what people call the rapture, right there. And when does that happen? At his coming. When he comes in power and great glory. At the end of after the tribulation, after the sun is darkened, he will gather his elect from the. So you want to be those people. You want to be on Jesus' side of that, because everybody else who sees Jesus coming, what are they doing here? Verse 30, all the tribes of the earth will mourn. They see Jesus coming, they're going to be like, oh crap. And they're going to be sad, because they'll see him coming. They'll see the one they've rejected and belittled and persecuted and killed on because of the name of. They will see him whom they persecuted, who they struck. They will see him. And they'll be like, oh man. And because he's not coming happily singing and playing a little ditty on his trumpet. This is a war horn.
Oh crap, he's coming.
He's coming in power and great glory, and he's going to right some wrongs here. How do you know that? Because right here, if you have a Bible, mark verse 31, because Jesus gives some lessons here from 32 to the end of the chapter that he wants you to get from what he just said. We're going to get to those lessons in a minute, but I'm going to skip it for now. I'll come back to it, I promise. But I'm going to skip it because he picks up the rest of the story in chapter 25, okay? Because verse 25, he says, then the kingdom of heaven will be like, no, I'm sorry, 25 verse 31. When the Son of Man comes in his glory and the angels with him, then he will sit on his glorious throne. You see what he does? So he pauses the delineation of what's going to happen at verse 30 of chapter 24, verse 31. And he picks it back up in chapter 25, verse 31. That's interesting. I never noticed that correlation of numbers. But he picks it back up in 25:31. He says, when you see the Son of Man coming in his glory and all the angels with him, then he will sit on his glorious throne. So what I skipped are several stories and parables that Jesus gives, some lessons he wants you to learn in preparation for these events that are going to happen. And certainly we don't need to skip them. We need to go, because Jesus is not so much concerned that we know the events, but he's more concerned with that we're ready for the events. And he gives us some important lessons for how to be ready in the end of 24 and in the beginning of 25. But before we get to those, let's just look at what he says. When the Son of Man comes in his glory and all the angels with him, then he will sit on his glorious throne. So he's coming to take his throne. Right? Everybody, is that fair rendering? So when Jesus comes with power and great glory after the tribulation, after the sun has been darkened and the moon doesn't give his light, he's going to sit on his throne. And before him will be gathered all the nations. And he'll separate people, one from another, just like a shepherd separates the sheep from the goats. So he gives you an illustration. Shepherd goes out to the field. He takes the sheep, puts them in one pen, puts the goats in another pen. Separates sheep and goats. Jesus is going to separate people like that. He'll place the sheep on his right hand, and the goats will be on the left. So they're sheep and goats. That's an illustration. There's two different groups. Sheep and goats. Who do you want to be? Let's see. The king will say to those on his right, "Come, you who are blessed of my Father. Inherit the kingdom that's been prepared for you before the foundation of the world." Wow. This has been God's plan from the beginning. Before the worlds were ever made, he had a plan to bless his sheep. So Jesus isn't just... What's going on in this world is not taking Jesus by surprise. It's not an afterthought. Jesus isn't reacting to, it's not like a chess game where Satan makes his move and now Jesus makes his move. No, he's already got all the moves planned out. And he knows how the game's going to end. He's going to be the only king on the board, standing. Then the king will say to those on his right, "Come, you blessed of my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you before the foundation of the world. Because I was hungry and you gave me food. I was thirsty and you gave me drink. I was a stranger and you welcomed me. I was naked and you clothed me. I was sick and you visited me. I was in prison and you came to me." Then the righteous are going to answer him, Lord, when did we do that? When did we see you hungry and feed you? When did we see you thirsty and give you drink? It's confusing to us. When did we see you a stranger and welcome you? When were you naked and we clothed you? When did we see you sick or in prison and visit you? And the king will answer them, "As you did it to one of the least of these my brothers, you did it to me." So here's something very, very important here. There's some deeper theology here. The evidence that you are a child of the king is that you treat your brothers and your sisters like you treat Jesus. You love them like he loves them. And you love. That's the measurement. You love God's people. You don't hate them. I'll give you an illustration of that. I was on a plane flying back. I don't remember where I was flying from, but it was an hour or two flight. And the guy next to me asked me a question about the Bible I was reading or a book I was reading, and it led us to a discussion. The problem was we were sitting on the plane and we were sitting right over the wing. And you know what is over the wing, don't you? The engines of the plane. And so it was real loud where we were. So in order for him to hear me, I had to kind of be talking a little loud. And for 20 or 30 minutes, I'm explaining the explicit gospel in a loud voice so everybody around me, and not just this guy, could hear. And when we were about to land, the lady in front of me turned around, looked at me with this evil voice. She said this, "I'm a Christian, but I don't have to go around telling everybody about it." And she was mad that I would dare speak of the glories of Jesus Christ publicly. That this was something private. You tell me something. She a believer? She real? Now Jesus describes in Matthew, other places, he says, many will be in that day who say, "Lord, Lord, didn't I do this and didn't I do that?" And Jesus is like, I don't know who you are. I don't know you. No, you know God's people by the way they treat God's people. That's what's here. It's not that they did these things to earn salvation, to earn their place with Jesus, but rather the things that they did marked that they were his sheep. That's the point here. Verse 41 says, "Then he will say to those on the left, 'Depart from me, you cursed, into eternal fire, prepared for the devil and his angels. Because I was hungry and you gave me no food. I was thirsty, you gave me no drink. You hated me and you hated my people,'" is basically what he's saying. "I was a stranger, you didn't welcome me. I was naked and you didn't clothe me. Sick and in prison, you didn't visit me. Lord, when did we see you hungry or thirsty or naked or a stranger and sick or in prison, and we didn't minister to you?" And he says, then he will answer them saying, "Truly I say to you, as you did not do it to one of the least of these, you did not do it unto me. And these will go away into eternal punishment, but the righteous into eternal life." Wow. So there it is. There it is. There are birth pains. There's going to be an abomination of desolation. There's going to be this great delusion that if it were possible, even believers would follow it. There's going to be great tribulation like there's never been on the earth. Then there's going to be signs and wonders in the heavens. And then you will see the sign of the Son of Man coming in the clouds with power and great glory. He'll gather his people unto himself. He will then sit on the throne of his glory, and he'll separate his people from those who have rejected him. He'll put the sheep on his right hand, so the judgment will follow immediately. And there's only two destinations. There's either, "Well done, you good and faithful servants, enter now into the joy of your reward," or "Depart from me, you cursed, into everlasting darkness. There's weeping and gnashing of teeth." Eternal punishment. There's only one or the other. There ain't no purgatory and there ain't no middle ground. There's a separating. There's a judgment. And that's it. That's the event. I mean, that's everything. So when you read the rest of the Bible, you're going to get bits and pieces of more information about each of those stages. There are places in Revelation that talk about wars. Where do they fit in the narrative? Probably in the birth pain section, where there's war and rumors of wars. You're going to read about the Antichrist who blasphemes God and rides. That's probably around the abomination of desolation portion, right? You're going to read about stars, mountains falling out of the sky into the oceans, and you're going to read about other like stars falling from heaven onto the earth, killing a third of the earth. That's probably the last stages where the sun will be darkened and the moon won't give its light. But we have with Matthew 24 and 25, we have the overarching synopsis of the last days. There it is. And so I've already gone an hour and a half, and that's probably long enough. So the rest of our Bible studies, as we come back to it, I suppose, we need to read what Jesus said in the middle of 24, where here are the lessons I want you to learn. Is how do you get ready for that? But I'd love to start looking into these other passages, like in 2 Thessalonians 2, where Paul describes the abomination of desolation with a lot of detail. And we can start filling in the gaps of what that is and what that looks like. And then we can go to Revelation and start to see those and start to look at the different prophecies of Revelation and see where do they fit in the story that Jesus just told. Where do they fit in that narrative? And you can just start to see and build a picture and get more and more detail of it. So that's kind of the way I approach last things. And I guess since we've already gone for an hour or so, maybe this is a good place just to stop and just chat for a bit. And I don't want to kill you with it, with too much. But that's good. That's good stuff. I love Matthew 24 and 25. What I love about it is this direct answer to the question, when are you coming? What's the sign of your coming? And the end of the age. And Jesus answers, all right, here it is. It's real simple. There are people that try to complicate it and say, wait a minute, it doesn't mean that. And they try to kind of dismiss the simplicity of Matthew 24 and 25 with the complexity and the difficulty and the lack of clarity of the Old Testament. Oh, no. This Old Testament verse, that's what Jesus was talking about here in Matthew 24 and 25. That doesn't mean, that's not really. In other words, they try to manipulate these texts to fit into their theology. And I just think it's a bad error to do that. So that's, I'll shut up now. Give you guys a chance to share your thoughts or questions or whatever, if you have any.
Yeah, where does Trump fit in that?
Yeah, it's a good question. I don't know. I don't think the Bible really answers that. I think there.
Well, he could be seen as an idol, somebody that a lot of people are following.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think he's a godly man at all. But I think he could be God's man. Kings are raised up and put down all the time, good and bad kings, to do God's bidding. Mm-hmm. So we know that he would not have risen to power in the United States unless God allowed it or orchestrated it or whatever. We know that Obama or any other evil king that made it into office, all of that is under God's authority and his control, and he has the ability to raise up a king and take a king out of office anytime he wants to. So we have to look at history and say God has a plan, and there's a bunch of bad stuff in that plan, and they're bad stuff done by bad people to God's people, and God is okay with that. That's hard for people to grab, but you got to come away from what we just read. You got to come away with that. Could it be that I might die in this famine? In a famine that's coming? Maybe. Is God okay with that? Yeah. Why is he okay with that? Well, number one, God makes life and death choices every day, doesn't he? All of us are going to die. Every one of us. At some point, even if we get to live a long life, we will die. God chooses how we will die. We were appointed unto death. He knows the day and the hour of our death. He's got all of our days numbered. From the day of conception. Oh, what is that? What is the verse, Seth? It's Psalm.
It's a great question. I should have it memorized, but
138. Let's see if I'm right. $139. I could look it up real fast. Let me look it up real fast because it's not ringing a bell here. Let's see. Psalm 139. O Lord, you have searched me and known me. You know when I sit down. You know when I rise up. You discern my thoughts from afar. You search out my path and my lying down, and you are acquainted with all my ways. Even before a word is on my tongue, behold, O Lord, you know it altogether. You hem me in behind and before, and you lay your hand upon me. Such knowledge is too wonderful for me. It is high, I can't even attain it. Where shall I go from your spirit? Or where shall I flee from your presence? If I ascend to heaven, you're there. If I make my bed in Sheol, you're there. If I take the wings of the morning and dwell in the uttermost parts of the sea, even there your hand shall lead me, and your right hand shall hold me. If I say, surely the darkness shall cover me, the light about me be night, even the darkness is not dark to you. The night is brighter as the day, for darker is as light with you. For you formed my inward parts, and you knitted me together in my mother's womb. I praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Wonderful are your works. My soul knows it very well. My frame was not hidden from you when I was being made in secret, intricately woven in the depths of the earth. Your eyes saw my unformed substance. In your book were written, every one of them, the days that were formed for me, when as yet there was none of them. That's an awesome psalm. I just read half of it, but it's not like God has any afterthoughts. They're all before thoughts. Yeah, and it's all. Has it ever occurred to you that nothing has ever occurred to God? There's never been a moment when God is like, now I.
Well, I love how he almost feigns it at one point when he's talking with Abraham, and he's like, well, what if there's 50? And he's like, well, okay. What if there's only 25 righteous? Oh, okay. What if there's only 5? And it's like he's bargaining down, and God's like, this is entertaining. Almost like it's an afterthought, but it's not. It's just one of those, like, what kind of exchange was that you could literally be bargaining as if somehow God doesn't already have it figured out? But it's one of my favorite passages.
So one of the things we just have to realize is that God has planned our death. He knew us before we were ever formed in our mother's womb. And he knows our days, our downsittings and our uprisings. He says, where can we go? The Lord is well acquainted. And so he may have it for me to die at the hand of someone because of his name. I may die in a famine. I may die in an earthquake, or I may die of old age. I don't know his plan for me, but it's not an evil God, and God's not worried about my death either. There's another scripture in the Psalms that says, precious in the sight of the Lord is the death of one of his saints. God looks at death and he ain't sad at all of his people. That's when he gets his reward, which is you. We are God's heritage, according to Malachi. We are his prized possession. It ain't nothing about me that makes me prized, but that makes him pretty awesome that he would set love on an unlovable man like me. You know what I mean? That makes him really good, not me. It doesn't make me good. That makes him good. So anyway, we have to understand that God is okay with bad stuff happening to his people, but he gives us an assurance. Don't worry. Just endure to the end. Bear my name to the end, and I will save you. You will be saved.
One of the things that kind of changed my perspective on what to expect out of life is that essentially when you accept Jesus into your heart and you've chosen that path, eternity's been assured, and it's not something that you attain or one day come into. It's what's already started. So essentially there's a continuity between how we live on earth and how we live on heaven. There's a storing up of goods that aren't susceptible to rust and moths and things like that, but in heavenly places. And it's that idea that you don't have to wait to think eternally of what is beneficial, what's good, and what benefits everyone in the long run. And so it has changed my perspective in a lot of ways of, like, there is a very minimal consequence of the transition from death to life. And so why be so concerned about life to death? It's a blip. And at that point, you just don't even consider that as being really an important point of life. And it does have an effect on just about everything else that I do.
Well, Jesus tells us, don't worry about your life.
Yeah, if he's concerned about the sparrows and he knows the counts of hair on your head and all these nuance and details, it's like,
Yeah.
how much more do I care about you? Like, yeah, I'm not really too worried about that.
Yeah.
It's tempting sometimes, though, to get caught up in the worries of the world and all that it holds, because it is a fear-based world that we live in, and there are many trappings to encourage someone to get sucked into some part of the fear of it. And I think that's probably one of the greatest enemies of our time is honestly, more than any of the physicality, is that mentality of fear that is so gripping in these days that people lose their minds because everything's like, well, what if, but what about, and oh no, I'm scared of everything because I'm being told to be scared of everything. I'm like, I'm not scared of anything and I'm not dying. So maybe there's not really a benefit to that. But without faith in Christ, I don't know that I would have that ability to be unconcerned with the degree of craziness going on in our culture.
Well said.
Just so you can see where I'm going next time we meet, look at Revelation 6 on the screen if you want to. So now what we're going to do, I'm not going to do it now, but I'll just give you a quick couple examples. But what we do now that we have a simple understanding of the framework of the last days, birth pains, abomination of desolation, tribulation like there's never been, signs in the heavens, the coming of Jesus, judgment, right? That's the order, right? That's what we just read. Now that we have that framework, we can now read Revelation, which starts to put a spotlight on each individual section of that framework and fills in some of the details for you. What are those birth pains going to be like? What is the signs and the wonders going to be like, right? So I'll just give you an example. So after he sees a vision of the Lamb who was slain in chapter 5, who the God's people were singing a new song to, he says he opened one of the 7 seals of the scrolls that chapter 5. We'd have to read that, but anyway, he says when he opened the scroll, I heard one of the 4 living creatures, which are seraphim, I believe, say with a voice like thunder, "Come!" And I looked and I beheld a white horse. So he opens the scroll. He says, "Come here, look at this." And he says, "And I saw a white horse." And then you're going to see, he opens the second seal and there's a red horse. And he opens the third seal and there's a black horse. And he opens the 4th seal and there's a pale horse. So these are the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, right? You've heard about that, right? This is where that comes from. This is where that comes from. Chapter 6 of Revelation. So what did he see, though? He saw a white horse, and this is what he saw. Verse 2 says he saw, and its rider had a bow, and a crown was given to him, and he came out conquering and to conquer. Okay, so what's this rider doing? He's got a bow, so he's shooting at people. He's got a crown. He's a king. He's a warrior because he's conquering. So where would that fit in what we just read in Matthew 24? Which element? The birth pains, the abomination of desolation, the tribulation, or the signs in the heavens? Which area do you think?
Chicken ass and taking names for 100, Alex.
Remember Matthew 24 says the kingdom will rise against kingdom.
Yeah.
And so he's coming to conquer so this is a conquering warrior. So maybe that's describing the war. But let's go on. He goes a second horse. It was bright red. Its rider was permitted to take peace from the earth so that people should slay one another. And he was given a great sword. So now there's no peace on the earth. So again, wars and rumors of wars, right? Third seal, black horse. And his rider had a pair of scales in his hand. And I heard what seemed to be a voice in the midst of the four creatures, a quart of wheat for a denarius. Do you know what a quart of wheat makes? A loaf of bread. And you know what a denarius is? A day's wage. So what do you think that's referring to? If a loaf of bread costs an entire day's wage.
Inflation.
Think of that.
Yeah, but
Yeah,
why?
that's what I was thinking.
Yeah, inflation, but why? Because maybe wheat is scarce. Maybe it's gone up. Maybe the expense of it has gone up because it's hard to get. This might be referring to famines. You see? Fourth seal, pale horse. Its rider was named Death, and Hades his rider was named Death, and Hades followed him, and they were given the authority over a fourth of the earth to kill with the sword, and with famine, and with pestilence, and by wild beasts of the earth. So I think that's the description of the wars and rumors of wars and the famines and all that's going on in the earth. It's going to be of such that a quarter of the earth are going to die. So this isn't just a little death by war. This is 25% of the world's population is going to die because of this war. No peace on the earth. Famine, pestilence. It's bad stuff, but that's the point. And so you just kind of get the sense that this is going to be like it's never been on the earth, right? And Jesus goes on to describe, there was a fifth seal. I saw the souls of those who had been slain for the word of God and for the witness they had borne. So does Jesus talk about people dying as a witness for himself? He says they're going to put you to death because of my name. So here's just Revelation 6 is just describing that very thing Jesus already spoke about. Verse 10, they cried, Sovereign Lord, holy and true, how long before you'll judge and avenge the blood of those who dwell on the earth? And then they were each given a white robe and told to rest a little longer until the number of the fellow servants and their brothers should be complete. In other words, hey, there's a specific time and it's not done yet. Jesus says, unless I cut the day short, though, everybody will die. He says, so there's a day coming. There's a completed number. It's not going to go on forever. Verse 12, he opened a sixth seal. There was a great earthquake, and the sun became black, and the moon like blood. Oh, Jesus talked about that, didn't he? Signs in the heavens, right? And the stars of the sky fell to the earth, and as the fig tree sheds its winter fruit, when shaken by a gale, the sky vanished like a scroll that is being rolled up, and every mountain and island was removed from its place. It's pretty scary stuff. The kings of the earth and the great ones and the generals and the rich and the powerful and everyone, slave and free, hid themselves in the caves and among the rocks of the mountains, calling for the mountains and rocks, fall on us and hide us from the face of him who is seated on the throne. You see the order of events in Revelation 6? There's wars and rumors of wars, such as it's killing a quarter of the people of the earth. There's famine and pestilence, people dying. There's signs in the heavens. And then there's one seated on the throne that everybody's mourning over. The great day of their wrath has come. Who can stand? You see, Jesus already described that entire event. That is, Revelation 6 is the last days, just in summary form, but with apocalyptic language. Does that make sense? So that's kind of where we're going. That's an example. You've got the entire order of events right here in chapter 6. The birth pains to the one sitting on the throne. So anyway, that's how I interpret the Bible, guys. That's how I go through prophecy. I start with Matthew 24 and 25, and then I understand everything else, like these cryptic visions that John sees in Revelation, in light of what Jesus told us plainly. And then you come away with a really good understanding. Revelation is like the NFL replay. It's not chronological. It doesn't show us the whole game. What it is a play will happen and it'll be told about. And then what happens on NFL replay? They'll show us the same play from a different angle. They'll pause the play in a certain spot and look at the relationship between the ball and the line, and they'll really focus in on a knee or an elbow or something like that. NFL replay. That's what Revelation does. The entire story is right here in Revelation 6. The rest of Revelation is just focusing in on the knees and the elbows. It's retelling some part of that story, giving us more details, filling in the gaps of what those times, the order of events is going to be like. So when we get to chapter 13, we're going to learn about the beast and the Antichrist, and we're going to really get to understand what the abomination of desolation is like. It's there that it says nobody will be able to buy or sell unless you take the mark of the beast. That means buying and selling will be so regulated by the ones in control, by the one in control. Well, how can they regulate buying and selling? CBDCs.
Digital currency. Heck yeah.
You see? So when I hear about all this news about CBDCs and how we're moving in that direction, I'm like, oh, that's how Revelation is going to end up being. Now, we're not there yet, but you can start to see it now. That's how they're going to regulate buying and selling. If I don't fall into their narrative and fall into their line of thinking and reject Jesus, which we haven't talked about the abomination of desolation. We got to understand that a little bit. That's another day. We'll go to 2 Thessalonians 2 for that. But if we don't swear our allegiance to him and his system, you're not going to be able to get food. You're not going to be able to sell and get money or whatever. You're not going to be able to work. And it's going to be bad news for Christians, which Jesus told us about. Which is why I'm not really concerned with stashing up a bunch of crypto. Trying to prepare for the last days. Because when I read the Bible, Jesus tells me the way it's going to be. It's going to be... it doesn't mean that it can't, leading up to the time of the abomination of desolation, you can't benefit from crypto. I don't think crypto in and of itself is evil. But there's going to be a time coming where it'll be through crypto that you're regulated, your selling and buying will be regulated. Absolutely. And unless you have subscribed to the system of the beast and sworn your allegiance, and so to speak, and swearing your disallegiance to Jesus and all other gods, then you will not be able to buy or sell. You won't be able to live. You won't be able to sustain life. And it'll be hard.
I wonder if that pertains to gold as well as crypto, whereas like you'll be regulated as to what you can buy or sell, and just in order to participate in the system, you somehow have to get your valuable cryptos or gold into the system in order to transact. And that's kind of like where everything else becomes worthless anyway, in order to buy food.
And if you're a troublemaking...
Maybe that's where the value is, though.
And if you're a troublemaking dissent, one who dissents to the world system and this abomination of desolation that's coming, this lawless one, then you're not going to be allowed to buy or sell. There's going to be, so we got to connect the dots later, as we go through these texts, because it's just too much. But that's the way it's going to be, and that's where it gets interesting. So there's something coming that's going to give rise to to an abomination of desolation that will be standing in the holy place. And he will be against all other gods, 2 Thessalonians says. And we will have to take his mark. I don't know that it, and we'll talk about it later, but it doesn't necessarily mean that there's a physical mark, though it could be. It simply means, because God says in other places that we are marked by him, that we have his mark on our hand and our forehead. But he's not referring to a literal mark. In other words, you're going to know God's people and you're going to know those who aren't God's people. It'll be very clear. Those who love Jesus and are allegiant, have their allegiance to him, will not be able to hide it. And
So
time.
this calls for wisdom.
It does. Stamina and patience, endurance, willingness to suffer, and getting ready now. This is what I'm getting ready for in my own mind. Ready. And I need to get my children ready. Because if I love my life and I love no pain and no suffering so much that I'm willing to reject Jesus so I can have a little food, that's going to be hard. I need to be prepared to not love my life, but to be willing to lose it. So, now, like I said, crypto isn't the evil thing, but I think it's going to be leading to the system of the beast, where they can completely regulate all buying and selling. And so that's where I think we're going. So you can just begin to, okay, this is how they're going to do it. So we can kind of begin to see we're on the cusp of this coming to real fruition. It might be 30, 40, 50 years from now before it really takes hold in our culture and generations, right? It may take times. I may die in the process, but these things are beginning to happen. So, hey, guys, I hope you enjoyed it. Thanks for chilling over the Bible with me. It's fun.
Some of my favorite lives.
I miss teaching. I teach one Sunday a month anymore. The first Sunday of every month is my week.
Well, I think you should take the other 3 weeks and spend that here.
I'll try.
That would be fantastic.
Well, you also got to make that YouTube channel you were talking about.
Yeah, I have it. God's
Put more work on your plate, hey?
No, it's not. It's work I want to be doing.
Yeah.
It's just it's more about my problem. My hang up is I want to do it well, and I know that I'm not going to do it very well in the beginning. And I was watching some guy, like this entrepreneur. I have some channels I watch that are, and you got to be you got to get over that. I mean, it's like God was speaking directly to me. You got to get over that fear of failure, and just do it. So I just don't know how to put together a good video. I can sit in front of a camera and I can teach, or I can sit in a live and just open my Bible and teach it, but I don't know how to engage our culture quickly. I'm not good at that. I'm not pithy in any way, ever. With anything I do, I'm not good at that. And our culture almost demands that you give it to them in 2 minutes. And that's not in my wheelhouse.
That's why Sunday Night Lives will go on for 3 hours sometimes.
Well, I mean for those to be slow and just methodically walking through the charts. I mean for that to be an extended live. But
yeah, it's free flow. It's free flowing. Like, if there's more to look at, cool. If there's not, and you're tired, it's like,
yeah.
Cut it short and cut it long. Doesn't matter.
Yeah. But yeah, I'm just not gifted at quick. And so anybody that listens has to want to listen. And I feel like there aren't many out there that want to listen, or you know what I mean. That's just in my heart. It keeps me from doing stuff. But I'm thankful for you guys that are here, and I hope it ain't go on too long.
Oh no, this is nice.
What else are we going to do? Sit there and just watch the 1 minute chart?
I got that up here too.
It did the same way in no time here.
Well, oh, nice, man. Oh, you're driving, aren't you?
Yep, just cruising along, listening to you. You say an hour and a half. It's like, what?
Yeah, it's midnight now.
Quick.
We kind of started meeting, gathering about 5 after 10. And I guess I'm still recording. The recording is hour and 35 minutes. When do you want to meet again? And we can go to the next section. I'll show you we'll just start taking each text just like we did, and we'll start building a bigger picture of what's going to be, because that's when it gets fun, just starting to look at the big details or the details of each. Now we start walking through Revelation, we start looking at 2 Thessalonians and what the New Testament writers are talking about these last days, and they give us more detail about the way it's going to be, and it's fun.
I would say bare minimum we should go once a week, but I mean, I'm up for more often than that. Twice a week is fine.
All right, pick a day.
Once a week, like
pick a day. We'll do it.
Pick the same day, whatever today is.
Thursday.
Just keep doing the same thing.
I don't mind doing it twice a week. That'd be fun. Like Monday, Thursday.
Ooh, yeah, that would make sense.
I'll record them, and if you can't make it, we'll do them late like this if it's not too bad, and I'll record them for anybody that misses them and wants them. I mean, just we'll see what kind of gathering we get. So, all right, we'll meet again on Monday then. I can't do it Sunday Sunday night because I'm dog tired after the live stream.
Yeah.
But maybe Monday night and Thursday night. That'd be good. Last words of. You got any questions or comments before I stop the recording?
I think the questions are going to come next time around. I'm going to give things some thought and come with some ideas, I think.
All right. We will come back to Matthew 20:24 because, in fact, if you want to read it in your own time, Jesus gives some analogies and some lessons that you really need to, because that's what Jesus wanted you to know. He's like, listen, this is the big takeaway here. And I skipped over it, okay? Because I was just really trying to get the chronology of what's going to happen. So read the parts that I skipped in Matthew 24 and 25. That they'll be good, and we'll go through those at some point. But that'll be another lesson, because you can handle each lesson that he gives, because there's like 5 or 6 different lessons in there. Or 4 or 5, I can't remember. But there's 1, 2, 3, 4, like 5 at least, maybe 6 in there. Analogies and stories that he tells that are designed to prepare you for the right mindset that you need to have during these days. So it's critical that we walk through that and have the mindset that Jesus wants us to have. So you can read that. And then if you want to read Paul, maybe the next time we meet, we'll probably go through 2 Thessalonians, chapter 1 and chapter 2. That's a really, really good 2 chapters on the last days. There's specific teaching by Paul that's really clear. It's another piece of the really clear and plain. We don't have to try to, like the 4 horsemen vision that we just saw, we had to try to figure that out, right? Because that's not clear and plain. No, that's not the clear and plain stuff. No, 2 Thessalonians is clear and plain. It's just specific teaching that any reader should be able to read and get. And so when you understand Matthew 24 and 25, Any reader should understand that and get it without any other text. You should just, if you ask Jesus, when are you coming back and when's the end of the age? That's his answer, clear and plain. That's where I start, because that's where the disciples did. And then Paul gives some meat on the bones to some parts of that, because Paul was taught by Jesus as well, though not directly in person like a disciple, but he was given the inspiration and the teaching, and he also had the texts. Paul was well acquainted with Peter. He was well acquainted with Mark, and others, and who were there, and so anyway, he had access to the direct teachings of Jesus even at that time. So anyway, he was also taught in the Holy Spirit by Jesus, and so he delivers explanation of Jesus' own words in these texts, and so they become clear and plain. Any reader should understand it very clearly and plainly. And so we start with those texts as a framework, and then we can go have some fun with Revelation. All right, let's try to figure it out now. Where does Revelation fit in the framework? And I find if you do that, it becomes really easy to understand what's going to happen and really have some meat on the bones. And then you can have some fun trying to figure out, who the Antichrist is going to be, or what it's going to be like, or whatever. And that's speculation. We don't know any of that. We just know what's going to happen.
Or it could be very, very literal. Like, you'll just hear the trumpets. Like, I actually thought that I heard the trumpets one time. There was a building that had the alarms going off, and it was like really loud, but it sounded like it was coming from everywhere. I had to pull over and be like, Jesus, are you coming? I'm looking up in the sky and stuff. I'm like, oh my gosh.
Trust me, you ain't gonna have to. Oh. You ain't gonna have to ask. You're gonna know. Ain't nobody gonna have to tell you. So awesome. All right, love y'all guys. Enjoyed it.
You too, Jim. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure.